Most riders spend years chasing more power, more displacement, more torque, more everything. And then one day, they ride something smaller, something lighter, something that just works. And they realize they've been thinking about it all wrong. Today, we're looking at 9 motorcycles that prove fun has nothing to do with horsepower. These are bikes built around feel, confidence, and real-world usability. And by the end, you might be reconsidering everything you thought you needed. Honda Shadow Aero 750. The Shadow Aero 750 is one of those bikes that doesn't ask much from you. And that's not a weakness, that's the whole point. From the moment you pull away, there's a smoothness to the power delivery that bigger cruisers often can't match. It never surges, never catches you off guard. It just pulls cleanly and lets you settle in. What you notice after an hour is how little effort the whole thing takes. The riding position is relaxed without feeling slouched, and the low seat height gives you a confidence at stops that matters more than it seems. It's not trying to be a Harley. It's not trying to be anything other than exactly what it is, and that honesty is refreshing. This suits a rider who wants a genuine cruiser feel without the weight penalty of a larger machine. It handles weekend runs and light touring equally well. The one honest downside? Highway wind protection is minimal, so longer slab miles can wear on you. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $4,500 depending on condition. Yamaha V-Star 950. Where the Shadow plays it calm, the V-Star 950 brings just a little more character to the table. The V-twin has a distinct pull to it. Nothing aggressive, but enough personality that you actually feel it working beneath you. It's the kind of engine that makes you want to ride a little longer just to keep listening to it. The ergonomics are well thought out. Reach to the bars feels natural, and the seat strikes a balance between style and actual comfort that a lot of cruisers in this class miss entirely. This is where it gets interesting. Yamaha tuned this bike to feel bigger than its displacement suggests, and on open roads, it genuinely does. It works best on relaxed two-lane roads, where you can let the torque do the talking without constantly searching for more gear. Riders who like a bit of soul in their machine will connect with this one quickly. The downside is that the stock seat, for all its visual appeal, starts to make itself known on rides beyond 2 hours. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $5,000 depending on condition. Kawasaki Vulcan 900 Classic LT. The LT badge on this Vulcan stands for limited edition, but what it really means in practical terms is that Kawasaki did the touring work for you. Windshield, saddlebags, highway-ready ergonomics. It arrives prepared in a way that most bikes in this class simply don't. The 900 cubic centimeters V-twin is an easygoing motor. It doesn't demand anything from you, but it responds well when you need it to. There's enough mid-range pull to handle two-up riding without feeling strained, which is something riders often discover matters far more than peak horsepower figures ever suggested. What you notice over time is how composed this bike stays on longer rides. It's not exciting in a dramatic way, but it builds a quiet kind of confidence that keeps you coming back. This suits someone who wants to travel light without stripping the bike down first. It works best on mixed routes, some highway, some back road, where the windshield earns its keep and the saddlebags stop being a luxury and start being essential. The honest downside is weight. At around 640 pounds wet, it's not a bike you want to manhandle in tight parking situations. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $5,500 depending on condition. Suzuki Boulevard C50. The Boulevard C50 is a bike that rewards patience. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't try to grab attention in a lineup, but spend a few hours with it, and something starts to click. This machine was built around the act of riding, not the act of impressing. The 805 cubic centimeters V-twin runs smooth and pulls predictably across the rev range. Suzuki tuned it for real-world torque rather than peak numbers, and you feel that in the way it handles rolling starts and lazy highway merges without drama. The riding position leans slightly forward compared to some competitors, not aggressively, but enough to take some weight off your lower back on extended runs. This is where most bikes get it wrong. They sacrifice usability for aesthetics. The C50 doesn't. The controls are intuitive, the mirrors actually work, and the fuel range is genuinely respectable. It suits a rider who values reliability and low-drama miles above all else. The one area it falls short is suspension. It can feel a little stiff on broken pavement, especially with a passenger. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $4,800 depending on condition. Here's something worth sitting with. The bikes that feel the most fun to ride aren't always the ones with the most proof. Comfort and confidence aren't compromises. For most real-world riding, they're the whole game. Honda CTX 700. The CTX 700 is one of those bikes that confuses people at first glance. And that confusion is entirely understandable. It doesn't look like a cruiser. It doesn't look like a tourer. It sits somewhere in between, and Honda clearly didn't lose sleep over the category problem. What they built instead is something genuinely practical. The parallel twin is smooth, fuel-efficient, and completely unfussy. It doesn't surge, doesn't vibrate excessively at highway speeds, and returns fuel economy figures that will make you reconsider how often you're stopping. The DCT option, Honda's automatic transmission, is available on this model, and for riders who want to focus entirely on the road rather than the gearbox, it's worth serious consideration. The seating position is the real story here. Low, wide, and surprisingly supportive. It's the kind of position that doesn't announce its comfort immediately, but proves itself over distance. It doesn't try to impress, and that's exactly why it works. This suits a rider who prioritizes practicality and ease without wanting something that looks purely utilitarian. The honest downside is wind exposure. The small screen does limited work above 65 miles per hour. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $4,200 depending on condition. Kawasaki Versys-X 300. Forget everything you think you know about 300 cubic centimeters bikes. The Versys-X 300 will recalibrate your expectations within the first 20 minutes. This is a machine built around versatility in the most literal sense. Light enough to feel nimble on tight roads, capable enough to handle a full day of mixed terrain without complaining. The parallel twin revs freely and keeps the bike feeling lively in a way that larger, heavier machines simply can't replicate. What you notice after an hour is that you're not fighting the bike at any point. It goes exactly where you point it every time with very little effort required. The upright riding position keeps you comfortable and aware, and the ground clearance gives you genuine options when the road surface gets interesting. This suits a rider who wants to explore, not just commute or cruise, but actually go places and not worry about what the road looks like when they get there. The honest downside is highway comfort. Above 70 miles per hour, the small displacement starts to show, and wind fatigue becomes a real factor on long, open stretches. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $3,800 depending on condition. BMW G650GS. The G650GS is BMW's entry point into adventure riding, and it makes that entry remarkably approachable without feeling like a compromise. This is a bike that carries the DNA of proper off-road capability while remaining completely manageable on everyday roads. And that balance is harder to achieve than most manufacturers make it look. The single-cylinder 650 cubic centimeters engine is characterful in a way that parallel twins rarely are. There's a thump to it, a rhythm that becomes part of the riding experience rather than just background noise. It pulls strongly in the low and mid-range where real-world riding actually happens, and it never feels strained on gradual highway sections. This is where most bikes get it wrong. They either go too far toward adventure capability and sacrifice road comfort, or they dress up a road bike in adventure clothing. The G650GS genuinely sits in between. The riding position is upright and confidence-inspiring, and the suspension handles varied surfaces with a composure that surprises you on rougher roads. It suits a rider who wants genuine versatility, someone who takes the long way home and doesn't always know what that road looks like. The honest downside is seat height. At around 31.5 inches, shorter riders may find confidence at stops require some adjustment. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $4,500 depending on condition. Suzuki TU250X. The TU250X is perhaps the most quietly confident machine on this entire list. It looks classic, it runs clean, and it asks almost nothing from the rider in return for a genuinely enjoyable experience. In a world obsessed with displacement and features, the TU250X makes a calm, unhurried argument for simplicity. The single-cylinder 250 cubic centimeters engine won't win any performance discussions, and it knows that, and it doesn't care. What it delivers instead is a light, responsive feel that makes urban riding and country lane exploring genuinely pleasurable. You notice this over time. The way the bike disappears beneath you and stops feeling like a machine you're operating and starts feeling like an extension of where you want to go. Fuel economy is exceptional, maintenance is straightforward, and reliability is essentially a given. This suits a rider who wants a second bike for shorter runs, or someone returning to riding after time away who wants to rebuild confidence without pressure. It works best on back roads and town riding, where its lightweight agility shines. The honest downside is range limitation. Sustained highway speeds sit near the engine's comfortable ceiling, and longer interstate stretches aren't where this bike belongs. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $2,800 depending on condition. Honda NC700X. The NC700X is the bike on this list that most people haven't ridden, and most people who have ridden it quietly wonder why they waited so long. Honda built this around a genuinely original idea. The 670 cubic centimeters parallel twin was derived from a car engine, which sounds like a marketing footnote until you understand what that actually means in practice. It was designed to run efficiently at low RPMs in stop-and-go traffic over long distances without drama. And that's precisely what it does, better than almost anything else in this displacement bracket. What you notice after an hour is how unstressed the whole experience feels. The engine isn't working hard. You aren't working hard. The bike just moves smoothly and economically and lets you think about the road instead of the machine. The storage compartment where a fuel tank would normally sit is a practical touch that sounds minor until you're on a long ride and realize your helmet fits inside it. The riding position is neutral and forgiving, and the suspension handles real roads, not smooth ones, with quiet competence. This suits a rider who values intelligence in engineering over emotional branding. The honest downside is character. The NC700X is efficient and capable, but it won't stir anything in your chest the way a V-twin cruiser might. It's a thinking rider's bike, not a feeling rider's bike. On the used market, you can usually find these starting around $4,000 depending on condition. 9 bikes. 9 completely different answers to the same question. What does fun actually mean when you strip away the horsepower obsession and start riding for yourself? The truth is, the most enjoyable miles most riders ever log don't happen at triple-digit speeds on a machine that's barely being controlled. They happen on roads like these bikes were built for, relaxed, real, and completely yours. Which one would you choose?